Hello, everyone. Greetings. I am Sonal Kohli. I am a chartered accountant by profession. I welcome every one of you to this webinar, which is being organized by the Digital Accounting and Assurance Board of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. And in this particular session, we welcome you all we welcome all of the members. We welcome all of you, and especially our esteemed faculty who during this session they would give us a background and idea about the overview of the forensic accounting and the investigation standards. So in the today's webinar we have CA Uday Kulkarni with us. Welcome, sir. uh, Sir is a practicing chartered accountant, and Sir is having a professional experience of around 25 years. He's a fellow chartered accountant, qualified as certified internal auditor, also certified information system auditor (CISA), and certified IP insolvency professional under the IBC code.
Sonal, can I start?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Okay. A warm welcome to all the participants, and thanks, Sonal, for your kind introduction. So let us start the agenda for the today's webinar. We are going to talk about the forensic accounting and investigation standards. Of course, we are going to give overview of that. In between, our chairman, sir, Charanjit Singh Nanda, sir, he is going to address all of us. I think he will join within 5 or 10 minutes, and he will be with us, and he will also give us some guided words. So till that time, we'll start our session. So all of us know that forensic accounting and investigation that is creating a lot of buzz in the today's world. More basically because the lot of frauds are getting tabled out or surfaced, and last 2-3 years or more than that, I can say from 2015 onwards, there is a much need of this forensic accounting and investigation kind of a skill set for the various types of the investigations or the legal proceedings which are going to be dealt with related to these surfaced frauds or whatever the investigations are going on by these legal enforcement agencies. We should be proud enough that these forensic accounting and investigation standards are unique one. Why I'm saying so? Because the ICAI is our Institute of Chartered Accountants of India is the only institute in this accounting world who has come up with this full set of forensic accounting and investigation standards. And one more thing which we should note here is that even if you consider all the forensic science, I mean, not only the forensic accounting, but all the forensic science, including the digital forensic or any other types of forensic, there are more than 100 types of forensic which is conducted right from your hair to and the skull and whole body and whatnot. In all those areas, this is the only second standard which is available worldwide if you see in the forensic science. So from that point of view also, this is creating a history, and this is a very landmark kind of a thing. Not only that, our institute has taken a step ahead and has made these standards mandatory from the 1st July 2023. So whatever the forensic accounting related assignments are going to be handled right now from this 1st July 2023, for those standards, for those assignments, the standards are applicable. So what we are going to discuss today, it's a total overview. We are not going to deal in detail about each and every standards there, because it will take a lot of time, and this is 3 hours webinar. So we'll try to make an overview about these standards. In this standard, if you see typically all of us as a professional, we are aware about the normal auditing standards, accounting standards, and the internal audit related standards. In all those standards, when we say it is a full set, You will find the preface of that, you will find the framework, you will find the basic principles related to that particular profession, and then you will find the standards. So similar arrangement is also there in this forensic accounting and investigation standards with we call it as FAIS. So in all these things, we are having this preface, and we are also having the framework and the basic principles related to that. The question is why these forensic accounting standards, why it is made mandatory. All these questions are there. The thing is that forensic accounting now needs an organized knowledge body for when the professional is conducting any assignment related to that. And for that purpose, it was very necessary to have the best practices to be followed by each professional. So whoever be the authority, whether it is the legal enforcement authority, whether it is a judicial authority, or even any other client who is going to appoint any professional for conducting any type of the forensic accounting or investigation kind of an work, then at that time it must be necessary that all of them should be conducting those assignments with the standard practices, right? And that was one of the basic objectives about this when we thought about having this forensic accounting and investigation related standards. Then of course these standards are not only for the professional. Of course professionals are going to take some guidance from these standards, but at the same time there are other stakeholders, like the judicial authorities are there, the law enforcement agencies are there, or other stakeholders like the banking sector is there, insurance sector is there, the stock markets are there. All of them, all the stakeholders related to these sectors, they are expecting certain things, and to give them certain kind of a knowledge, to make them aware about the certain terminologies. All that we have covered in this FAIS. Of course, the one major requirement from all these bodies or the stakeholders is about the reporting part of this forensic assignment. So that is also well covered in a very separate standards, and so that they will also come to know what they are going to get once they will go through this FAIS. And also not only that, they will clear their various terminology, various concepts related to this forensic accounting and investigation, but when they are going to allot certain assignments to the professional, they will have a clarity about the role that the professional is going to play, and the reports, what they are expecting through the reports. All those clarities definitely will be there. For that purpose, we are going to discuss certain concepts which are there and defined in the standards. Certain common terminologies are also there. So overall, it is quality benchmark. It is harmonizing our performance, and we are going to spread awareness. We are going to give the knowledge and guidance, not only the professional but other stakeholders also. One more thing, with this set benchmark, with the set standards, of course, the professional work in this area is going to be evaluated. And for that evaluation purpose also, the criteria could be available from these standards, right? So all these things are definitely there. Of course, the ICI, the well-established brand, has taken a lead, as I said, by publishing, and not only publishing, making it mandatory. And that's how they have already taken a lead in this forensic accounting world, and that is which is getting counted not only in India but all over the world. I think Nandaji will speak a lot about that. But this is developing, not only developing, this is adding brand value of the ICI, right? So all these objectives are there when the standards are developed by this professional team. Right now, if you see that there are three basic documents, we call it as an overarching document. So as I said, there is a preface which you will find in any type of the full set component of any type of the standards. Then there is a framework that would also be there. Then basic principle which the professional has to adhere to that. So all these basic documents, overarching documents, these three documents are there as a part of these standards. Then what we have done, I'm talking this we because I was also part of this the study group, which has actually contributed a lot of hard efforts for the development of these standards. So there are, if you see, there are 100 series, there are 200 series, and like that. Every series that is given here, that is having certain meaning behind that, and the standards are clubbed in every series with that meaning. So if you look at the 100 series, right? So 100 series is dealing with the key concepts related to this forensic accounting and investigation world. The key concepts are related to the nature of engagement, the key concepts related to the fraud risk, key concepts are related to the laws and regulations, and related to the applying of hypothesis. Many of the professionals, though they are carrying out the forensic work, forensic accounting related assignments, they may be aware about these terminologies. But as I said, apart from the professionals, the other stakeholders also needs to have certain clarity about certain concepts. And the major shift which we have taken from the standards, I am going to discuss about that in a minute or two. So all that has been well gathered or clubbed in the 100 series. We'll take an overview of that also. The 200 series is related to the engagement management, right? We are all aware about how to give the acceptance when it is the any type of the audit is allotted. So suppose somebody is allotting the statutory audit or internal audit or any other type of the audit. Now, all the chartered accountants who are in practice, they are well aware about what to do and what not to do, because the procedure is well set in those areas. As far as this forensic accounting and investigation assignments are considered, or engagements are considered, a bit of difference between those two things. I mean, already there is a difference between the auditing world and this forensic world. The evidence is the definition. Right from the definition, we also gather the or evidences under the audit, what we call as an audit evidence. But in the forensic also, we are going to gather the evidence. So, but there is a difference, right? And that approach is essentially needs to be developed by the forensic professional who is going to accept the engagement. And for that purpose, we have considered that what are the stages, or what are the actions which are required when somebody is going to accept those kind of an engagement. And if you look at what is clubbed here, what is included here. So first, we have included in the first standard the engagement objective. Of course, I'm going to discuss in detail when I'm going to take the overview of the standards. But even if you look at the headings of what the standards are talking about here, so the first, when we are going to accept or going to involve ourselves in the engagement, we should be clear about the objective, and that is the first stage which we have taken as an engagement objective. And actually acceptance process, that means issuance of the engagement letter, or getting the appointment letter, having the clarity about our scope and all these things. So that has been detailed guided in 220. Many of the times we may require to take the help of the other skilled persons. So that is also there in the 230. So all these things are well defined and well guided under this 200 series. So up to 200 series, I'm going to cover. And for the 300, 400, 500, and 600 series, my colleague CHLG is going to talk about that. But what is in the 300 series? It's actually the execution part of the assignment, right? So first, in the 100 series, we have clarified the key concepts related to this sector as a forensic accounting and investigation. Under the 200 series, it is going in detail about the engagement process, about acceptance of the assignment. In the 300 series, if you look at again the headings, it is a one by one, step by step, the procedure which needs to be performed for the execution of all these engagement or assignments. So you have to plan, you have to collect the evidence, you have to maintain the documentation, you have to you have to first develop the methodology, then you have to develop, after the development of the methodology, you have to execute the work procedures. Interview is also part of the work procedure. It is a team efforts. You have to review and supervise the team, and you will have to appear to explain what you have done with these various authorities, including the legal authority, judicial authorities, engagement, the enforcement agencies, etc., etc. So what to do in that procedure, because this is all a part of the execution of your work area. So that is clubbed under 300 series. 400 series, if you look at, that is a very specialized areas which we have selected. Because a role of data analysis, I think now, again, all professionals, all chartered accountants, they are well aware about the power behind the data analysis, right? So we have started using in various assignments, including the audits. But the power of data analysis in the forensic accounting and investigation, that is doing a lot of differences as far as the triggering out the transactions where from where we can collect the evidences, and it requires some specialized skill sets, and that's why we have identified that it is as a specialized area, and for that purpose the standards is clubbed under the specialized area. Similarly, most of the businesses, I can say, rather than most, I can say that 99 or 99.5% of the business houses, they are now using one or another digital environment, right? So it could be ERP, it could be CVS, or similar kind of an digital ecosystems. Every business houses are enjoying, and they are performing, they are executing their businesses processes through this digital environment. So whenever this forensic accounting and investigation work would be there in that environment, necessarily evidences are required to be gathered from that digital ecosystem. So guidance about that is provided under this 420, under the specialized area. Then 430 is about loans and borrowings. What we have witnessed, if you look at the trend for last 4 to 5 years, especially in India, so you will find the number of frauds are getting surfaced related to the loans and advances, right? Siphoning of the fund, diversion of the funds, the companies are involved, the directors are involved, whatever. So that also requires certain specialized skill set to gather the evidences related to that. Basically, that is the large area from where the professionals are getting a lot of opportunities for the assignments related to the forensic and investigation things. Reporting, the very, very important area, because whatever we are doing, we are going to our output, we are going to submit our output to the stakeholders, and that is going to be used in not only to the stakeholders, but in the total legal proceedings, what is going to be submitted at all the fronts, and that is what is going to be a decisive decision making matter, I can say, if we have done that in the right way in this legal proceedings. So reporting of the results, reporting of the outcome of the assignments, I think that is the most important standard in this 500 series. And of course, keeping ourselves with the quality marks, quality benchmark, if learning from every assignments, improving on certain things, that is a continuous process, and that is applicable to any area. So similarly, it is applicable to the forensic accounting and investigation matters, and that's why how to keep ourselves updated, how to maintain the quality levels, all that has been guided under the 600 series about the quality improvement and all these things. So likewise, if you see, there is a logical coverage, and all these standards are clubbed in a logical way under these various series, right? So in the preface, normally what you will find, so in the preface, normally what is mentioned is how the standards are getting developed. That is what is mentioned in the preface. So you will find that the DAB, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, which has contributed the standards, forensic accounting and investigation standard, how they started doing that, what procedure they have followed. All this is mentioned in the preface. Framework is the basic thing. We have to follow certain principles also. All these things are there in these forensic accounting and investigation standards. One important matter which all the participants, they have to understand at this level. Since the standards are made mandatory from the 1st July 2023, the standards are principle based. Right. The first thing, all of us, because we are going to read, we are going to apply, we are going to maintain the document to demonstrate that we have made compliances when we are performing these assignments. So when we are going to read the standards, when we are going to understand the standards, we should understand that the standards are there, what to be done, right? What is expected of the professional. So here the question is not how, but what to be done under these things. So that is what is answered under the standard. But the question how it is to be achieved, how it is to be done, that is something given in the implementation guide. So again, the implementation guide is also published. You can download that from the ICI website, right? That is available. So how to do these things, that is guided in the implementation guide, but what to do, that is guided in the standards. So these are two separate questions, and these two separate questions are dealt in the two separate publications, right? What is in the standards, how is in the implementation guide. So I recommend that whenever you are going to apply the standards to any of your professional areas, I suggest that when you are going to read the standards, along with the standards, please also read the implementation guide. Why? Because the detailed procedure about the applicability of the standards is mentioned in that implementation guide. This is number one. Number two, we have covered a lot of examples, lot of cases. So with the examples, that procedure, how part is guided in the implementation guide, right? So these twin publications, right, standards plus IG implementation guide, will do a lot of things, will guide you in a detail, so that there should be a minimum ambiguity about the applicability and maintaining the documentation, or having the clarity about certain concepts that may be possible. But if you go through these two documents side by side, then all these things will be get clarified. That is what I believe, right? Now, as I said in the preface, there is a typical standard setting methodology. So there is certain topics, like here the forensic accounting and investigation standards, that was the theme. Then the DAP formed the study group and drafted the standards. Then those standards were reviewed by the DAP. Then those were made available for the public for their comments upon. That was the exposure draft. The 30 days time period was given for that purpose. The suggestions were again discussed in the study groups. The final touch was given, and then the standards were submitted to the ICI Council, which then approved. And now the stage is that the standards are made mandatory from the July 2023, a very historical and a proud moment for all of us. Now, what is the major change that has been brought out by the standards? Normally, if you go to the forensic area, especially related to the accounting related forensic, the normal terminology which is getting used, still now it is getting used, that is forensic audit, right? But the focus has been shifted by the standards. So we are not going to call that as a forensic audit. The basic purpose is not to get confused with the other types of the audits and this forensic audit, right? So because there are a lot of different types of the audits, we conduct the statutory audit, we conduct the internal audit, and whatnot. Maybe professionally, the professional chartered accountants, they are aware about the difference between these assignments. But for the general public, for the common stakeholders, the stakeholders other than the professional, it should be very clearly, the concept needs to be clear to them. And that's why the terminology has been changed from the forensic audit to the forensic accounting and investigation. So any assignment which is coming under the forensic area, so that is going to be called as a forensic accounting and investigation kind of an assignment, and not a forensic audit kind of an assignment. So that is a very major and important change that has been brought out with these standards. Of course, when we are bringing such a major change, there was a need to define all these things very clearly. And that's why, as I said, when we are going to discuss certain the concepts under the 100 series, you will have a more clarity about that. But even in this framework, you will find that this terminology like forensic accounting, what is forensic accounting, what is investigation, all these things are clearly defined. So forensic accounting is basically related to the gathering and evaluation of the evidences, and the basic objective behind that is to interpret those evidences and report. So basically it could be the accounting statements, it could be the transaction between the various accounts that needs to be understood, collect the evidences related to that and interpret that and report that, so that the competent authorities, could be the judicial authorities, they may understand what type of transactions are handled or operated through this related to that particular case. Investigation is a bit, you can say, deeper than this forensic accounting. So it requires the examination of the facts, it requires examination of the records. You'll have to evaluate and verify various documents to gather the evidences, and that is totally focused on a particular type of a fraud. It could be the payroll fraud, it could be the loan related fraud, or any other type of the fraud specific related to that particular sector or area. So these terminologies have been clearly defined under the framework. The framework is essentially based on the code of ethics. So any professional body like ICAI or any other professional body, they do have to make a compliance with certain code of ethics. Our ICAI has already issued the code of ethics. Those code of ethics are also applicable to the professionals who are handling these forensic accounting and investigation standards, right? So that is at the base level of this framework. One more important and appreciable things about these standards is that standards are not lengthy, right? If you find the average page size wise, you will find the average page size of each standard is around 5 to 6, not more than that. And you will find there are predefined standard format of these paras. So you will find these 6 paras which are there in this PPT. That first para you will find in each standard, that is introduction and scope, that is related to the what is the scope of these standards, what we are reading, which we have to apply, what is the objective of that standard, why the standards have been issued, what are the requirements, what the professional has to do for that particular activity for which the standard is there, that is the requirement para. Certain clarity, of course, is required, conceptual clarity, requirement related, the explanation that is covered under the para 4. Documentation of the work procedures. So whatever is required to be demonstrated that we have made a compliances with the standards, for that purpose, what kind of a documentation is required, right? So these documentation, if we keep, that is probably will say that you are making the compliances related to the standards. That para is there, para number 5, and the last para is the effective date from these standards would be made mandatory. And of course, this is from the 1st July 2023, from which the standards are made mandatory. So the standards are in a standard format in a way. Now coming to the basic principles which needs to be made compliance with by the forensic professional. So there are 10 principles which are included in the standards. The first 5 principles, which we call it as an attribute related principles, and the next 5 are related to the performance related principle. So the first 5, independence, integrity and objectivity, due professional care, all these first 5 principles, I hope all of us we are well aware about, because in normal CA practice also we have to make the compliances about these first 5 principles, isn't it? So we are well aware about that part. But the next 5 principle, that is contextualization of situation, primacy of truth, these are something which is totally related to this forensic area. So what is contextualization of the situation? So when we are going to deal with any forensic accounting or especially the investigation kind of an assignment, We should be aware about the fraud is related to which sector. So we should have knowledge about that sector, what business related to what type of a business. So understanding of the business environment, right? Typically, the frauds includes if you have heard or read about the fraud triangle, there is must be some motive, then there must be opportunity, and then the rational. So the motive related things or opportunity related things could be well understood by you if you can contextualize this situation, because understanding the sector, understanding the particular business related procedures, right, how it works, and the other facts related to that particular environment in which the suspicious fraud might have taken place. If you have a well understanding about that environment, that would help you to in your assignment for performance of whatever the work procedures you are going to. Contextualization of situation is, in my opinion, is also important to establish, to develop the hypothesis, because these are two connected things. Once you get the idea about the business environment, business processes, the development of the hypothesis, and accordingly the testing of the hypothesis, developing the further methodologies for your work procedure, all that could be easy one. So that is an important principle as a performance principle. Primacy of a truth. Forensic accounting and investigation, the assignments are basically fact finding assignments, right? So our focus is upon the facts. Primacy of or whatever the evidences we are going to collect, and what is the punchline for that evidences, because as I said earlier, we may gather the evidences under the audit also, and we are going to gather the evidences under this forensic accounting also. Audit evidences are basically gathered, which of course the sufficiency, appropriateness, all the attributes related to that evidences are there in the audit related evidences. But the audit evidences are basically for the auditors themselves to satisfy themselves about a particular transaction or activity. Here, the evidences which we are going to gather are basically as per the requirement of a particular legal provisions, and that's why we use the punchline while doing this assignment. Is the evidences forensic? If you look at the definition of the forensic, it talks in a similar language. Forensic is what? Forensic is a collection of the evidences, gathering of the evidences which are acceptable to the court of law. So the underlying thing is acceptable to the court of law. And when the court will accept that, there are certain criteria, there are certain provisions under the laws, especially the Indian Evidence Law Act, if you see. So all these things, we are gathering the evidences for related to those facts. The facts could be anything. Not always we are going to be with the bias that we have to gather evidences only to prove the frauds. It's nothing like that. Sometimes there could be the other way also, that the fraud might not have been taken, but all these things need to be come out with on the basis of whatever the evidences we are having in our hand. We have to report that, right? Respecting rights and obligations. Again, when we are going to conduct the assignments, it is free from our any bias, whether it is professional bias or any other professional judgment. It should be free from that. Many of the times the stakeholders may name that, okay, X is responsible for that fraud, Y is responsible for that fraud. That is their say. But as a professional, we should be free from that kind of an information. So we should not develop our work procedure, we should not develop our hypothesis, we should not define our work methodology with that bias, because then we are not following the principle. Because forensic is such an assignment where you can expect that in 90 to 95% of the cases are going to be dealt with the legal proceedings, right? And there our report should stand, not only our report, but whatever the evidence is, whatever our report says, which is backed by the evidences, all those things needs to be stand in that legal proceedings. So court should be able to find out something from our report within qualitative aspects. So in that process, we should be free from any biases. We should not go with certain biases, and we have to follow the principle of natural justice. All the parties he may be involved, he may not be involved, whoever that party could be, for all of them, we should give an opportunity so that they can put forth their point, and that is without any biases, right? So that is a principle of natural justice which we have to follow, and that's what coming out in this principle of respecting the rights and obligation. Separating the facts from the opinions. This is a very interesting principle. First thing we should note it here, that forensic accounting, first fact finding, second gathering of the evidences which is acceptable to the court of law. So whatever the reporting part of that, so that is related to the facts, and the facts we are going to establish on whatever the evidences we have gathered. But for the evidences, there is a quality mark that those needs to be acceptable by the court of law. So the major difference between the audit assignment and the forensic assignment, in the audit, mostly we are going to express our opinion, that is called as an opine. We are going to opine on the certain matters. But the forensic assignment is not the opinion based assignment, it is conclusion driven assignment, right? Conclusion related to the facts, conclusion based on our evidences, right? So when in the process of gathering those evidences, we have to perform the several work procedure. Interview, just an example, interview is one of the work procedure which we have to follow for gathering of the evidence. We can get a lot of information related to that particular fraud, related to that particular matter, related to that particular transaction. It itself could be an evidence, or the second thing is we may get the trigger for gathering certain additional evidences related to that particular matter. So when we are going to take the interview may give us a lot of information. So while gathering that information also, the professional should be aware that whatever he is informing us, within that there must be certain facts within that information which he is going to provide us. Within that information there may be certain facts, there may be certain his personal opinion, right? The person who is, for whom we are going to take. So we should be able to differentiate what the interview is giving us information. All of them might not be the facts, all of them could be his opinion. So we should be able to segregate whatever the information we are collecting from the various parties, various authorities related to that particular matter. We should be able to segregate what are the facts and what are the personal opinions of those persons, right? So this is very essentially be taken into consideration, and from that point of view, this principle is very important. Quality and continuous improvement, and that is, as I said in the beginning, from every assignment, we are going to learn something. Remember, all the forensic assignments are unique one, right? You cannot say a pattern of a particular assignment. So we will get a repetitive kind of an assignment. Probability is there. I'm not totally denying that. But normally, the assignments are different. Assignments are unique. And for that purpose, the work procedure, the methodologies, and applicability of these principles would be totally unique. And for every assignment, perhaps we will have to assess ourselves with these basic principles. Because for certain type of an assignments, the specific skill set may also differ. Let us say you are going to investigate a matter which is related to the certain mines, like coal mines or other types of the mines. So as I said, as a part of the contextualization of the situation, whether we are having the knowledge about that particular mining sector, which laws are going to be applicable for that particular mining sector, right? What is the business procedure, especially when they are extracting certain materials from that mining, where there could be possibility of the fraud. So whether we are having that skills and competence enough to investigate that particular fraud related matter, which is typically related to the mining areas. So as I said, the typically assignments may differ, assignments are unique, and for all of those assignments, perhaps we will have to apply these principles again and again. So we cannot take into consideration, we cannot apply as it is that I am expert in forensic accounting and investigation, so I'm free to do any sectorial assignment. That may not be possible, right? Because the skill set required for that particular sector may be or may not be with us, and accordingly, if we don't have that particular experience, then all the next principles, contextualization of situation, the separating the facts from opinion, these principles we may not get to, or we may not be able to comply with that particular spirit. So this also we have to consider when we are going to deal with those assignments, right? Now let us start with the okay. Before that, there is one question. If the engagement letter is of date prior to July 23, whether the standards are required to be followed while reporting? My answer is that the letter might be of, let us say, of May or June month, right? But if you are executing the assignment and if you are going to report it after the 1st July, so your reporting date is very, very important. If you are going to report that after 1st July, in my opinion, yes, the standards are applicable, right? So I think this might have got the clarity about the questions, right? So let's move ahead. Now let us start with the 100 series standards. Okay, I think Nandaji will join at any time, but we will. Amitji, we can continue, na? Okay. So we'll keep continuing.
Yes, sir. Please continue, sir.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So let us start the series 100 first. So in the 100 series, there are 4 standards. So the typical, as I said earlier, the standards are related to the conceptual matter, because the professional as well as other stakeholders should have the clarity about certain concepts, which we call as a key concepts, and the standards are related to the key concepts. So if you see the first standard under this series 110, that is nature of engagements. As I said, typically everybody will hand over to you by saying that this is a forensic audit, right? But as I said, audit is different. Now we are moving away from that concept, from the forensic audit to the forensic accounting and investigation. So the stakeholders who is appointing us, they may not have the clarity about the nature of engagement, but typically the engagement under this forensic area could be of 3 types. One, the first type could be of a forensic accounting. Second type could be of an investigation nature, and the third type of an litigation support, right? So the first part, which the professional has to make it clear, whether it is an audit assignment, I mean the normal audit, which we refer as an internal audit, statutory audit, or any other special kind of an audit, or this is a typical forensic assignment, right? So this first segregation is there. Why it is so? Because the standards are applicable only the assignment is of a nature of forensic accounting and investigation. If it is an auditing related standard, auditing related assignment, then of course the standards on auditing and the internal audit standard as per the type of the audit, those are going to be applicable, but not the standards. So first clarity should be there, and then we should. So now the matter is clear. Now let us assume that you have made it clear. Now this is a typical forensic accounting kind of an assignment. So under the forensic accounting, now there are 3 types. Whether it is a forensic accounting kind of an assignment, whether it is forensic investigation kind of an assignment, or it is a litigation support kind of an assignment. So this is a 3 types within the forensic area. And the professional should have a clarity about that, and that is what is guided, that is what is explained under this 110 series, right? We have already discussed that the forensic accounting, what is forensic accounting. In the first part we have discussed the definition of the forensic accounting here. So the forensic accounting is gathering and evaluation of the evidences, right? So that we can submit the report related by interpreting whatever the transaction, whatever the case may be. Investigation is going much into the depth of that particular things, and there we are enlarging the scope by examining or verifying the facts, records, and a lot of documents and then gathering the evidences and then coming to the conclusion, right? So what is forensic accounting? What is investigation? And that is well defined. Now here we have to apply whether this is typically forensic accounting kind of an assignment or investigation assignment as per those definition which just we discussed. The third type could be the litigation support. So this is possible under this. Having a more clarity about these areas, and I mean about these concepts, that what is again the forensic accounting. So here is first you will find that there is an indicative list here also we have mentioned in this PPT. So which could be possibly fall into this category of the forensic accounting. So forensic accounting could be the contractual violation, legal violation, a regulatory kind of a deviation, and those transaction, those facts, along with the evidences we need to submit before these competent authorities, right? Competent authorities could be anybody, I mean legal enforcement agencies, or it could be the judicial authorities, right? And for that purposes, the basic area which we are going to evaluate, as I'm talking about the forensic accounting as a services. So our basic concentration in this could be of examination of financial transactions or related transactions. It could be related to funds movement. Typically, we call it as an asset trail or the money trail. And we are going to play with the balances, books of accounts, for the verification of those things, right? So this is typically the forensic accounting standards. To give an example, the list, indicative list is there. Suppose there is a financial statement manipulation. We all know that the four corners by which the balance sheet and the profit and loss accounts could be manipulated. So something related to that is there, and somebody is having a doubt about that the financial statements are not showing the true and fair view kind of things, and this complaint is there, and somebody is asking us to investigate that matter. So this is typically the forensic accounting kind of services, right? The other type of the services, funds diversion or asset tracing. Typically in the loan frauds, what happens? The loan is not basically, the bank may sanction, bank or the financial institution, they may sanction the loans and advances for a typical purposes, which is mentioned in the loan agreements. Loan agreement is again a typical contract, but the borrower, instead of using those for that particular purposes or objectives, they may use that for another purposes, and there could be delay in repayment of that. Possibly the account could be classified as an NPA and all these things, and then the matter might have come for the investigation. So there the more focus is on where the money has, that borrowed funds has gone, where that has gone, whether that is diversified, whether that is invested into other assets. So all these things needs to be find out, and this is typically the funds diversion asset. Anti-money laundering or money laundering related cases where the trace of funds, actually how the illegal sources of funds are utilized, invested, how they were transferred across the channel. If we want to make a trace of that as a part of the investigation, that is typically the forensic accounting services. So these suspicious transaction under the IBC, insolvency and the bankruptcy code, that is one more things, puff transaction we call it as an, right? So preferential, undervalued and fraudulent transactions, right? So all these things are covered as a forensic accounting services, right? So the concepts needs to be clear in the minds of the professional. First, the professional should acquainted themselves with these concepts, and then they should be able to guide to their clients or to their authorities. Is the terrorist financing, other financial crimes are also covered under this claim? See, this is typically the case which the question is there. The question is right. Just I'm repeating for all the participant. The question is the terrorist financing and other financial crimes are also covered under the FIS? So the terrorist financing or the financing or the funds which are generated by certain criminal acts, right? So all of them could be possibly the part of the money laundering activity, and definitely to trace it out, where the funds have been generated, where they have been utilized, what assets have been created, a typical money trail and the asset trail, what we call under the forensic accounting. So that is well covered as a forensic accounting and investigation services. That is what I gave example as a part of the money laundering related services, right? So it is well covered under the FAIS, right? So this is forensic accounting. The concept should be neatly understood and clarified. That the second area is the investigation services. This is typically related to the frauds. So it is going much beyond that, because at that time, business environment, business process, other factors, the personal motives, gains, losses, right? All this interplay a very much role in that particular fraud. It could be any type of the fraud. So it is examination wise, verification wise, collection of the evidences wise, it gives a lot of scope. So for that purpose, we may have to develop the hypothesis. Many of the times I'm talking about the hypothesis. Hypothesis is typically the concept of developing a hypothesis is typically required when you are going to investigate the frauds. You might have heard the stories about how the police, they investigate any crime, right? When they are not getting any clue about a particular type of the crime, then they develop the various theories that whether this might have done or that this might happen. I mean, they are recreating in a way a certain scene, certain possibilities of the way by which this particular crime might have been taken. Similarly, in our area, when we are investigating the business frauds, typically business frauds are also well covered for this forensic accounting and investigation services, as well as the financial frauds. Both could be there. So operating frauds could be also there. So all these frauds, if we are not getting any clue, and of course we are going with the without any biases. So at that point, we may have to get a certain idea, and for that purpose we are developing the different types of the theories. That is what we call as an hypothesis. So typically the hypothesis development is an essential part when we are going to investigate the frauds, right? So the indicative list for these fraud areas could be the cyber frauds. Right now, this is a hot cake. So every day, everybody is facing a lot of, the cyber attacks. So if you are in the investigation of that particular cyber related attacks, so that is the services you can offer as a investigation type of the services. Similarly, insurance or personal injury related claims, you'll have to detect ethical code related violations. If you see the surveys which are conducted internationally, specifically the ACFE, which submit every year one report that is called as a nation report to the nation. And if you see how the frauds are getting surfaced globally, so they say that the most percentage of the frauds are getting developed, are getting getting surfaced by the whistleblower mechanism, by the tips, right? So whistleblower complaints, and if you see various sectors, even if you see the insurance sector, banking sector, or even the capital market related sectors, all the regulators are giving the most important to this whistleblower or complaint related, grievances related mechanism, and they are very strict in making the compliances of their regulation related to this whistleblower mechanism or the complaint related, grievances related mechanism. Why it is so? Because many of the frauds may get surfaced with that whistleblower complaints, and if the client is asking you to investigate the matter which has been complained by any stakeholders related to that particular sector, that is a matter of investigation. It is not a matter of the forensic accounting. There could be the allegation about the bribery, corruption related matter, theft related matter. So that is also coming under the investigation kind of and services. So now I hope now you are getting the clarity that when we are accepting the assignment, even we are calling, generally we are calling it as a forensic audit. At the initial stage, I said that is still now in the various sectors, various agencies, they are repeatedly calling it that as a forensic audit. The first we have taken the decision that now either it would be the forensic accounting kind of and services or forensic investigation kind of and services. So professionally, we should understand what is the difference. So I think these two PPTs, of course, the standards are well guiding you about how to differentiate between these two kind of services. So that is coming out of the first standard. One more service that the professional, forensic professional, and even who is the professional, that is also defined under this FAIS, right? So we are going to call that person, that professional, as a forensic professional who is going to investigate the matter, who is dealing with the forensic accounting related assignment. So we are going to call him as a forensic professional. Who is forensic professional? The definition you will find in the standards, right? So everything is made clear here. Litigation support is another area which could be there as a part of your assignment. So it could be either as an alternate dispute resolution, as an arbitration kind of thing, mediation. Now the mediation law is also passed in India. So these are again going to make you a lot of opportunity. And if you are going to involve into that particular type of an engagement, it is now coming under this forensic accounting and investigation standards. And the services will be called as in litigation support services. Many of the times you will have to appear before the competent authorities for the testimony, right? You may have to give the information to the law enforcement agencies such as police, CBI, ED, etc., etc., or you may be called as an expert by the court itself for given your opinion, or if you investigate the matter, you will have to appear as a witness for that purposes also. So if you are providing these kind of services, you are going to provide it as in litigation support services. Typically, one assignment may involve one or two or any combination, right? It is not typically a segregated kind of an assignment. Most probably, the litigation support services is mandatorily be there, because if you are investigating, if you are submitting the report related to forensic accounting, definitely, and if it is going to be a part of the legal proceedings, one or another day you will be called either by these legal enforcement agencies or by the judicial authorities to give your opinions, or they will be called you to cross witness, cross verify your things. So as I said, the forensic matters are all related to the legal proceedings, right? So we have to keep that all in mind. And that's why I said in majority of the cases, either you'll find the combination of 1 and 3, forensic accounting with the litigation or investigation with the litigation, but these things are going to happen. But we should be very clear about, because if we understand, we are having the clarity about what services we are going to offer, we should be well aware about the scope, defining according to that services. That is essentially be connected, right? So this is the outcome of all these discussions. The second standard in this series is 120, which is talking about a fraud risk. Fraud. What is fraud? That is also defined. And normally, all of us know the definition. What is fraud? That is defined. What is fraud risk? That also needs to understand. When we are going to investigate the matters, or when we are going to, handle the matters related to forensic assignment, we always should have in our background, whether we are developing the work methodology, we are executing the work procedure, that we should be able to understand the fraud risk. And how we can understand the fraud risk, right? We can understand the fraud risk by fraud indicators. In the normal language, we call it as a red flag. But in these standards, we have defined it as a fraud indicators. So when we are going to investigate the matters, when we are going to develop the work procedure for the forensic accounting related assignment, always we have to thought about these fraud indicators, whether the fraud indicators are there, what type of fraud indicator, because in the investigation, as specifically when we are going to investigate a particular type of the fraud, there the fraud indicators will give you a lot of triggers. Fraud indicators, it could be possibly from your understanding of that particular sector, understanding the businesses, and basically when you are going to gather around the facts about that particular matter or the transaction, you will get a lot of fraud indicators. But how to identify, how to catch that fraud indicator, that is a specialized skill which the forensic professional must have. Without that, because the fraud if we are not able to catch those red flags, if we are not able to catch those fraud indicators, perhaps the important evidence we may not able to cover. That is the possibility, just I'm telling you. But if you are able to identify most of the fraud indicators, which are definitely giving you the clues about what could be the possible evidences related to that. So your work procedure will be super fine, and you will be able to effectively collect the evidences which are going to be acceptable in the court of law. But if you are not able to develop those fraud indicators, if you are not developed the skill set to catch those fraud indicators, then perhaps the sufficient evidences you may not able to capture. So that is an importance of these fraud indicators, and that is well guided under this 120 fraud risk standard. So typically fraud risk or fraud indicators, yes, as I said, because it requires certain kind of an skill set. And again, we have to match those fraud risk or fraud indicators with that fraud triangle. What could be the motivation? What could be the weaknesses? Specifically, the environment related weaknesses, which are going to provide the fraudsters the opportunity to do any type of the fraud. So those fraud indicators, which I said that needs to be captured, that will give you more and more evidences, right? The next standard under this 100 series is laws and regulations. I'm again sorry for the repetition, but every participant has to understand now. Forensic is a part of a legal proceedings. And when it is a part of the legal proceedings, the forensic professional needs to be aware about certain laws and regulation. I'm not saying they may be expert in that laws and regulation. It could be possible that you may take the help of a legal expert, because all you are going to handle is the some part of that legal proceedings, because in the legal proceeding, if you look at, because this is typically the financial fraud, this is typically the business frauds, where your reports has got a substantial value, right? And your report is going to decide the matter, so it is carrying a lot of weight in that legal proceedings. And for that purpose, as I said, certain laws and regulation the professional is expected to know about. I'm not saying that he should be expert or she should be expert in that particular law, but the awareness about those things is essentially be there. In the standards, if you see, we have stated in the standards that there are two types of the law. First, let us understand, when we are getting the appointment for the forensic assignment, there could be two possibilities. First, we are getting the assignment which is governed by a particular law. So somebody is going to appoint us, basically the resolution professional, let us say, under the IBC. So that is typically governed as per the provisions of the that insolvency and the bankruptcy code. So that is an obligation which we have to know about, that whenever we are getting appointment by the resolution professional as per the IBC, insolvency and the bankruptcy code, so the professional must be aware about that transaction. What is preferential transaction? What is undervalued transaction? What is extortionate transaction? What is fraudulent transaction? That is well defined under the IBC. So that knowledge is essentially be there. Then there could be the appointment under the Money Laundering Related Act. All right, someone get an appointment from for that particular assignment from the ED. So there typically, as we have already discussed, this is a forensic accounting kind of an assignment where we have to trace out the money trail or asset trail. So while doing that, what is acceptable evidence is what are the provisions under which we are going to submit the report, all these things. So typically that money laundering related provisions, if we know, that would be contribute a lot in understanding. In some areas, the client may appoint you without naming any of the law. That we call it as a contractual kind of appointment. Suppose a company is appointing any of the professional, that this is payroll fraud might have taken place. This is the purchase related fraud that might have taken place, whatever. So there they may not name any of the law, right? But what will happen ultimately when the report will be get submitted? The case will be dealt under the provision of certain laws. So it could be under the Companies Act as a fraud, or it could be under the IPC as a fraud, whatever. So typically, we have to assume we should have a knowledge that even though at the appointment stage, the client is not sure, we are also not aware at this moment that they are going to appoint us because of the provision of certain law. They are just appointing us. But on the backdrop, when we are collecting the evidences, when we are defining the work procedure, we should have in our thought process that this assignment may end up under the legal proceedings, and that legal proceedings may be related to the Company Act, may be related to the IPC, and that's why the awareness about those provisions, typical provisions. I'm not saying that IPC you cannot go with that all the chapters of that, but typically whatever the sections which are applicable to the business fraud scenarios or the financial fraud scenarios, we should be aware about that. So that knowledge is essentially be there. And in the standards, you'll also find that we have mentioned the laws in a two ways. One is a direct impact laws. So what is direct impact laws? So the laws like Evidence Act, this is most crucial for any of the assignments. So whatever be the types of the assignment, forensic means collection of the evidences which are acceptable to the court of law. How the court will accept the evidences? If it is getting to be complied with the Indian Evidence Act, right? So the provisions related to the Indian Evidence Act, the direct impact acts, which we should be aware about. So this is what is guided under this, under the standards of laws and regulation. Let me take one more question. It is happening in the chat box. Should the report specifically mention what fraud indicators were identified? It would be better if we can, there are two parts. Reporting, I think CA Shailesh, my colleague, is going to talk about it under the 500 series. But as far as the questions are there, I'm just giving my opinion here. Typically, the reports would be defined if that is again a part of the laws and regulations, because there could be certain formats, there could be certain process by that might have been defined how the reports could be submitted. Perhaps the authorities, the regulators, they may define the format of the reports. So typically we have to follow that. But possibly in the fraud cases and where the client is appointing us contractually, there it is within the scope. If it is within the scope and it is within our scope related areas, I can see that it is a better idea and it is a good practice to give the fraud indicators. While saying so, when I'm saying that we can give the inventory of that fraud indicators, we have also mapped that or reconciled that with our scope, our work procedures, and possibly whether we are able to identify the evidences related to that. So this reconciliation would again be necessary if we are going to report that in our report as a fraud indicators. Very good question. I appreciate this question. But if we are going to mention in that report, I think the reconciliation with these three is essentially be done. Right. Otherwise, there would be the questions. Only the red flags are indicated, but nothing has been concluded upon that. Nothing has come out of that. And there are typically various complaints which are coming to us that the forensic professional has only given the red flags or only given the fraud indicators, nothing beyond that. So typically that should not happen. Outcome as a conclusion, whether you are able to collect the evidences related to fraud indicators or not, if not, why not? All these things needs to be crystal clear in our report, right? Then the next standard is applying the hypothesis. This is I have repeated more and again since beginning. The basic reason is that in the fraud cases, typically we have no alternatives but to form the hypothesis. Again, hypothesis is just a possibility. We have to develop a lot of theories, because in the fraud, we may have to recreate the fraud scenario, because without that, it may not be possible to catch all the corners or, as I said, the risk indicators related to that fraud. And without that, we may not be able to effectively collect the evidences. So all these things are equally related with each other. From that point of view, the hypothesis plays a crucial role in the investigation. So it is a theory. possibly it is a brainstorming which is required for development of the hypothesis. We have to consider all the possibilities, considering the contextualization of the situation. That is the principle which is well related with this hypothesis theories. And we have to evaluate each and every possibility which we have developed as a hypothesis against our work procedures. So perhaps we may have to, what we have to do is that, let us say that we have developed one hypothesis, we have to test that, whether this is going to work out, whether this is going to give us the evidences, whether this is nearly going to the facts about the frauds which has been taken place. So all these things we have to consider, and that's why it needs to be tested again and again. So it's not like that you have just formulated one hypothesis and it is going to be a final one. Possibly, if you can do that, nothing better than that. But it should not be the case in all the assignments. So you will have to develop the hypothesis more than one. You will have to develop it. You will have to test that. And accordingly, the one which is going near to your fraud scenario, which is going to give us the evidences, perhaps that will define your work methodology or the work procedure. And that's why the brainstorming for this, the theories, development of the theories, which should be considered, and that is again guided in this 140 series as a concept, because all these first four standard, if you see, these are related to the key concepts, and clarity about each of these concepts are there in these four standards. So I think this 100 series is very important when you are going to start applying or reading these standards. Again, I'm requesting again once more that how to do this. All this is a what process, how to do this, examples, cases, all that has been given in the implementation guide. So I again request, read the standards. Along with that, again, you have to revisit the implementation guide. That will give you more clarity about applicability of the standards in your particular assignment. The next series is 200 series, which is related to the engagement part, engagement management part. And there are 5 standards, right? So typically this is what you can say, that is before the execution of the real work procedure, because the execution part is covered under the 300 series. This typically before the execution part, what we are normally doing, somebody will appoint us, somebody will define the scope, somebody will say that this is a forensic audit, because that is the normal terminology which is famous nowadays. But we have to take a lot of care about when we are ourselves are getting engaged into that typical assignments, and the clarity about all these things should be there. So accordingly, this 200 series is planned. So it will start from the engagement objectives and all other things we are going to cover into that. So typically all these things we are going to discuss again as an overview in this discussion. So what is engagement objective? So if you remember, now under the key concepts, the 110 standard, it was talking about the difference between the forensic accounting services, forensic investigation services, and the litigation support services. So when we are getting engaged by either by the agency or by any company or by any other client, so we should be aware about what is the engagement objectives, what they want to do us, right? First, again, this should not be the audit, any type of the audit. Typically, it should be the forensic related services which they are expecting. That should be the broader objective. If you know the objective, then it will be beneficial, or you can now, with having the clarity of the concepts about or the definition of accounting, forensic accounting and investigation, you can apply those objectives, you can map those objectives within these 3 areas. Right. So objective should be clear. While when I am saying that the objective should be clear, look at the 4th point, which is very important. The objective shall not be designed to commit any particular outcome. Right. So ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि somebody somehow you prove that the fraud has taken place, or the damage is this much. You have to mention that 1 crore, 2 crore, 10 crore, 100 crore damage hua hai. So that should not be, and we should not design our work procedure according to. And that's why at the beginning, when I was discussing about the basic principle, biased pre-approach, that is very essential, right? But with that, whatever is coming as an evidences, the conclusion needs to be there. So that's the important point which we have to keep in our mind. The objective should not be any specific one, defined one, like the outcome. It should flow from your work procedure. The outcome should flow from your work procedure with the unbiased view, and whatever the evidences we are going to collect and going to submit it. Will the standards be applicable to even vigilance team of a bank if a specific forensic related investigation is assigned? The question is, so far, these standards are applicable to the forensic professional who are chartered accountants, who are practicing as a chartered accountants, who are member of the ICAI. Because ICAI can regulate the members, ICAI can make it mandatory for their members. Now, if you typically ask me, in that bank team, in that bank's vigilance team, if a member who is a chartered accountant, who is a member of ICAI, right, if he is working in that team, of course, the standards are applicable to him, right? For other non-chartered accountant members, if the question is from that point of view, suppose there is no one as a qualified chartered accountant in that team, then what would be the position? So in that case, the standards are recommendatory. But as I said, since these standards are unique one, you will not find any other standards like a full set of standards in any other accounting world. And this is the only one. I suggest that this is a best practice to adopt these standards even by the non-chartered accountants, right? Because this is giving you the best practices. This is giving you the how to perform with the implementation guide. So a lot of guidance is there with the examples, with the cases. So there is no harm in applying these standards even by the non-chartered accountants. Of course, if the chartered accountants are there, they have to follow these standards, right? So according to the objectives, again, the professional has to classify or if the clients are not aware, they should make aware the client what type of engagement they are going to do with that. So whether it is again a forensic accounting kind of services which they are offering, or whether it is an investigation services which they are offering, or whether it is a litigation support services they are offering. Why it is important? Because basically the skill set required, the mandates required, the coverage of the scope, and accordingly what could be the reporting responsibility, all these are totally related with this defining the objectives and accordingly stating what type of services we are going to handle. So this is essentially be noted with reference to the 110 kind of standards. Engagement acceptance and the appointment procedure. This is typically we all aware, as I said at the beginning, that we are well known about the acceptance procedure in the audit world. But this is a different area. Again, the assignments are unique. Less chances are there, I'm not denying, but there are less probabilities that you will get the repetitive kind of an engagement or assignments. So every engagement, every assignment could be the unique one. And for that purpose, the engagement acceptance process is important one. Engagement acceptance process means what? So typically the client will appoint you, client will give the background about the cases, then they will issue the appointment letter, and typically they are expecting the acceptance of this appointment letter, right? And typically the process is like that, you just sign as an accepted kind of things. But there is an importance to give the engagement letter also, because in the engagement letters a lot of things are going to be covered which are not covered in the appointment letter, right? So engagement letter is again one of the important document in the forensic area. Perhaps now this practice is getting evolving in India. But in future, there would be a lot of disputes which may also occur related to the scope of the assignment or engagement in the legal proceedings. Right. At that time, what validly the professional can defend himself and submit as an evidence is the engagement letter. Yes, of course, the agencies, the law enforcement agencies like the CBI or police, they may not have that particular procedure adopted in their total processes. They may not habitual of accepting this engagement letter kind of and things. Okay. But wherever it is possible, and in most of the time, it is better to hand it over this engagement letter, and the what is needs to be covered in this engagement letter. We are not just giving it as a standard that you have to comply with. In the implementation guide and also in the standards, the format what needs to be covered in that engagement letter, that is also given as an annexure. So we are giving the format, and typically you will find more guidance about that in the implementation guide. But before accepting this engagement, the due diligence, primary procedures and due diligence, which are the two stages. Due diligence and preliminary procedure. Preliminary procedure is again what kind of an assignment, what kind of an environment, what type of a client, the risk which could be there, which we have to identify. It could be any type of the risk right now. It may be the risk of not getting the fees after after doing this assignment. So that is typically also the risk which we have to consider. So from that point of view, what needs to be covered under the preliminary procedures and what needs to be covered under the due diligence, the guidance is mentioned in this 200 series standard, right? 230 is using the work of an expert. As I said, forensic is a teamwork. You may require an expert in the various areas. Typically, I have given one example related to the mining sector. Someone may get the forensic assignment related to the insurance sector, but he or she may not be knowing about the business processes or understanding about the terminologies which are going to be used in that particular sector. So probably in that kind of, and suppose you are getting the assignment related to the insurance fraud, right? So it may be possible that you are not totally aware about that particular business, but there you can take the help of certain expert who is expert in that particular insurance related businesses. But to whom we can say the expert, the definition is there, right? So that person should have possessing special skills or domain expertise. Again, the area is related to the collecting the evidences in the digital domain, right? So all the chartered accountants, they may not be having that skill set to collect the evidences in the digital ecosystem, and for that purpose, they may hire the expert who can use the various tools to gather the evidences in that particular digital ecosystem. But ultimately, whatever be the outcome from that expert, because expert is going to submit again you a kind of a report or their observations or their findings. Of course, you are expecting the evidences on the basis of which he is communicating to you. But ultimately, it is your responsibility, because you are going to take a decision, whatever be the findings of the experts, whether you are going to include that in your report or not. It may be possible that sometime there may be choice with the forensic professional that they may select any expert. Sometimes the client will say that no, this will work. This particular person will work on behalf of us as an expert. So when in both these situation, what to do before taking the help of the expert? How to verify the credentials? How to decide that a particular person is having the expertise, and also he has to follow the same principles which we all mentioned there. So there should not be any conflict of interest of that expert with that particular client. So all these points as a background verification we may have to deal with. So that is also a point which needs to be considered. Second, whatever the procedure he is going to perform, it may be typically required that he independently can do certain procedures, or it may be possible that in certain procedures, joint efforts would be required by us also and by the expert also. So all these things needs to be having the clarity, discussions, and accordingly the scope of that expert needs to be decided. The discussion should be on if the expert is getting if the expert is not getting insufficient cooperation, he is facing difficulty, how to handle that. And then whatever the comments or whatever the findings which is coming from the expert, again we have to going to discuss, we have to see the evidences are enough, and according to that the punchline, and then we have to decide whether we are going to include that in our report, because that is ultimately our responsibility. So all this is mentioned in this standard 230. 240 is typically engaging with the agencies, right? Now, what is agency? The first thing, we have used the word agency. So what is the meaning of the agency? So here meaning of the agencies are the law enforcement agencies and the regulatory bodies, right? So we should have the clarity about that. And for that purpose, a typical list of who are the agencies and who are the regulatory bodies, that is given in the standards. So the law enforcement agency, the CBI is there, Enforcement Directorate is there, Economic Offences Wing of the various state policies are there, SFIO, Serious Frauds and Investigation Offices under the MCA, that is there. And the regulatory bodies which are related to the particular sectors, like the banking sector is regulated by the Reserve Bank of India, SEBI is related to capital markets, and the IRDIA. So the clarity should be there that when we are dealing with the assignments which could possibly be came from or getting appointed by any of these regulatory bodies, or we may have to ultimately submit the report to those agencies or to those regulatory bodies. So typically when we are handling such kind of an, it may be possible that sometimes client will appoint us, but ultimately the report will has to be submitted with these agencies. It could be any combination, right? So at that time, we should be having knowledge about first about these agencies and their work procedures. These agencies are, of course, working as per their governing laws, right? And sometimes it may be possible that their procedures are defined as per their governing laws. Again, their reporting format sometimes could be fixed. Certain red indicators, like the RBI has given the early warning signals about the loan frauds. So typically that is guided in their regulatory framework. So the professional who is working on the assignment, ultimately the report is going to be handed over, or sometimes getting appointment directly from these agencies. So they should be aware about their governing law, their work procedure, their ethics, their protocols. All these things needs to be understood by the professional, and accordingly they should define their work procedures and methodologies also, right? Even communication with those, there could be a basic hierarchy with their protocols. As I said, it is not like that in a typical audit environment we are used to get an access to the various top level management with an ease. But in this case, when we are dealing with these agencies, typically all this communication is is totally handled with certain protocols. So you will not find that easiness while communicating with these agencies. So all these things we have to keep in our work processes or defining the work methodologies, and of course while defining our time periodicity with that. The last standard which I'm going to discuss, and I think Shailesh is already there. So this is a last standard of mine. This is communication with the stakeholders, 250. Communication start from the engagement itself, right? So we have to communicate. First, they will communicate us. They will appoint us. Then there would be acceptance. Then there could be the engagement letter. There could be the decision about the fees, the reporting format. All these things commonly we know that that needs to be communicated. But there are typical certain questions which may differ from the normal communication and abnormal communication in this forensic kind of an assignment. And that's why, because whenever there is a fraud, nowadays the media is glorifying that fraud as a scam, right? बहुत बड़ा scam हो गया. And then a lot of other stakeholders are also getting also attracted towards that, and there could be a lot of questioning. There could be a lot of try to gather the information from the professional who is actually dealing with that particular assignment. So how to handle that? That is also very important. Also, when there is an investigation of the fraud, perhaps there could be multiple stakeholders who may be interested in the reports of that particular from that particular professional. So whether we are allowed to share those reports with the other stakeholders or not. Another thing which is important in this communication is that when we have to gather the evidences, we have to reach out to the other stakeholders in a manner. The supplier of the company, they could be the customer of the company, they could be the authorities who are governing to the companies to whom the reports might have submitted, right? So they are actually not the appointing agencies for us, but they are very closely associated because they are working with our client. So these are the other stakeholders, and that's why we have classified under these 250 stakeholders as a primary stakeholder and other stakeholders. So who is the primary stakeholder? The primary stakeholder is the one who is appointing us. So it could be the agency, it could be the company, right? So they are our primary stakeholder, and primarily all our important communication should be only with the primary stakeholders. And if we want to get certain information from the other stakeholders, we need to communicate certain information to the other stakeholders. It should be with the knowledge of the primary stakeholders, right? So that is essentially very well covered under this 250. Another important things, what is the way of the communication? So there could be certain matters which are we have classified them in a two way. One is essential matter, and another is significant matter. So what is covered under the essential matter and what is covered under the significant matters, the examples of that are also given in the standards. So what is essentially matters? As I said, when we are accepting the engagement, we are defining our scope, we are defining our methodologies, we are defining our protocols also to whom to communicate what matter. If the agents we are working with the agencies, that is essentially be required. It is better if we are getting appointed under a particular law like the IBC law, then we can communicate the certain provisions under which we are getting appointed. In other cases, it is a better idea. Suppose they are appointing us under the contractual nature. It is a better idea to communicate the possibility of the other laws which may attract under for this kind of a particular dispute. Then what kind of support and cooperation required? Basically from the primary stakeholders who is going to give us a lot of information, lot of records, lot of documents. It is the responsibility of the primary stakeholders. But as I said, in certain cases, we may have to reach out the other stakeholders like the suppliers, like their customers, and or it may be possible that since certain business houses they are using the services like the cloud environment. So all the data would be in the cloud environment. So if we have to extract the data, then the support from that the cloud service providers, that also may be required. And of course, our fees, our resource team, all these things we are going to. And important matter in this essential matters is the reporting format. Right. So earlier there was a question about the reporting, what should be there, what should not be there. But whatever be the reporting format, that needs to be defined essentially at the beginning. Because as I said, like audit report, there is no prescribed any format, because again, the assignments are unique. So there is no prescribed formats for any report. So at the acceptance level, as a matter, essential matter, we have to agree with our client that this could be the reporting format. As I said, when you are working with typically with certain agencies, their reporting format might have been fixed by them with their experience, with their when they are handling the various legal proceedings according to the requirement of the legal proceedings. They might have defined their reporting format, and that also we can accept, provided that all these things needs to be communicated well at the time of acceptance of the engagement. What is significant matters? Let us understand that significant matters are those matters which are going to impact on our conclusion, right? So it could be anything. So it could be the life threatening situation. Because of that, we may not be able to gather certain evidences. Earlier there was a question that there is a fraud risk indicators, right? Well, fraud risk indicator is there. We want to collect the evidences, but when we are going to collect the evidences, we are getting the life threatening kind of inforce. So in that matter, we may not be able to collect those evidences, and because of that, the conclusion on that particular red flag may not be there in our report. So that creates the hurdle. That could be the stoppage, right? So this kind of an communication, of course, we are going to report that, but before reporting, what is required that these things are happening needs to be communicated to the primary stakeholders. Like in the typical banking loan fraud, what is happening? The borrowers are not cooperating. When the particular professional is handling the loan fraud related forensic assignment, many of the times they are coming up with that the borrowers are not cooperating with that, and because of that they are not able to collect the evidences. Yes, this could be the situation. The question would be that at that point, when you are not getting the cooperation immediately, whether you are communicated to the primary stakeholder, the authorities of them, because it may be possible that with your communication they might have been tried to solve the matters, and you may be able to get the communication, you may able to get those cooperation, and you may be able to get those evidences. But non-communicating and only reporting at the end, in the end, that we are not getting any evidence, that could not be the best practices. So whatever be the coming out as a hurdle, as a stoppage, which is going to have certain impacts on our conclusion, or we are not able to draw certain conclusion because of these hurdles, all these things essentially be first communicated as a significant matter, so that the primary stakeholders may take certain steps to resolve those matters. Perhaps we will start getting cooperation, perhaps we will start getting the evidences, and then it will be easier for us to conclude. But without communication, just directly going to the reporting part, that is something worrisome. And for that purpose, certain list of what could be the significant matters, as I said, lack of cooperation, prevention of access, withholding of information, destroying of the evidences, all these are life-threatening situation. Anything could happen. Essentially, whenever this happens, we need to communicate to our primary stakeholders, and for that purpose, when we are deciding in the essential matter, the protocol to whom these matters needs to be communicated, all these things needs to be predefined at the engagement level. So the friends, this is all from my side up to 200 series. I think Nanda sir is also there. Good evening, Nanda sir.
Very good evening, Kulkarni sir. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. I'm stopping my presentation, sir. Yes, sir.
Ji, sir. Good evening, Kaushik ji. Good evening, Sonal Kohli.
Hello, sir. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Very good evening.
Thanks a lot, Uday sir, for giving such a detailed background and overview for the 100 and 200 series of the standards, and for taking up our queries. Now, I would like to invite CA CGS Nanda sir to give us a keynote on these standards. So, let me give a brief about sir. Sir is a Central Council member of ICI. He's the chairperson of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board of ICI. Also the chairperson for Committee on Financial Markets and Investors Protection, ICI, and the chairperson for Committee on Information Technology of South Asian Federation of Accountants, SAFA. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Sonal. The two very respected and revered speakers of the day, Sri Uday Kulkarni, Shri Sailesh Kaushik ji, and all members who have joined here to go home more enlightened. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I couldn't join at the beginning because we are holding a very big program of capital market at Yogi Sabhagrah in Dadar. So I was with Mr. Anil Singhvi taking the session, so I thought that I should give my dictate to you, my submissions to you after the program. Ladies and gentlemen, forensic standards have created stirs across the entire globe. We are the first institute in the world to come out with forensic standards. And let me tell you, the best part is that we have not only promulgated forensic standards, which have been made mandatory from 1st July 2023, but in order to give guidance to the members at large, we have created an implementation guide. Both the speakers today were an integral part of the screening committee, which ultimately went through the doubts which were created by more than 150 chartered accountants in 20 groups. So let me tell you the genesis. 150 chartered accountants, 20 groups, they created the reference material implementation guide on every standard that came to the screening committee. The screening committee found out what was needed to be added, again sent back to the groups. The groups again added that. And once screening committee said yes, we sent it to the expert committee. After going to the expert committee, again deliberations was taken on individual standards. And ladies and gentlemen, then it was issued for public exposure. And simultaneously, 3 legal reviews were done. One by the legal section of ICA and 2 other independent bodies did the legal review, and then the document is ready. So now you have dual documents. Number one, you can go through the forensic standards, and at the same time you can go through the implementation guide of each and every standard and be more wiser, understand things in a better perspective, because these implementation guides are coined by people who have been in this forensic standard for years now. I want to tell you all, that is a great honor for the institute to promulgate these standards, and great thought process for us chartered accountants, because we have got a definite opportunity to showcase our skills. I want to tell you that people at times have dual thoughts. One has to eradicate them. There is a couplet which says, "Tamam ke tamam शहर बसाकर सुकून के लिए गांव ढूंढते हैं। तमाम के तमाम शहर बसाकर सुकून के लिए गांव ढूंढते हैं। कितने नादान हैं हम, हाथ में कुल्हाड़ी लेकर छांव ढूंढते हैं." My dear friends, if you want to become a true professional, deep dive into professional avenues and standards. Once you understand these standards, you would be at the right position to ultimately serve not only your stake or client, but the government and regulators. And more importantly, you can do the things in the right stance, wherein ultimately you would make not yourself only proud, but the great institute of which you are a member. I will not stand between you and Sailesh Kaushik ji. I know he is very eager to deliver his lecture, and more importantly, the institute runs on shoulders of such people. Mr. Uday Kulkarni, Mr. Sailesh Kaushik, they are always available for each and everything. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are there, the basic impetus of movement ultimately lies in making the profession proud. So ladies and gentlemen, I will withdraw now. Time is running short, and I want you to have a full idea of what Mr. Kaushik wants to communicate. Mr. Kaushik, the dice is all yours. You can take it forward.
Thank you, sir, for giving us a keynote. I would like to welcome Sailesh Kaushik, sir. So I'll give a brief about yourself, sir. So sir is having professional experience. Sir is a professional chartered accountant. So he's having experience of more than 25 years, of which 15 years is in the petroleum industry and about 10 years in the IT consulting. And at present, sir is into the accounting and audit practices. So sir is also a certified information system auditor. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Slide is clear?
Yes, it is visible.
Very much, sir. Please go ahead, Kaushik, sir.
Okay. Udayji has covered up to the 200 standards. I will be taking 300, 400, and 500. But just before starting, I'd like to touch upon where Udayji left off, in the sense that the standards are very closely integrated. Once we found out the nature of engagement and what constitutes a forensic assignment, we use that to delve into the engagement objectives. Now, in the execution phase, which is 300, we will use the same 110 and 210 to plan. Based on the fraud risk criteria, our risk indicators, and everything else, we will use the acceptance and appointment review criteria to make sure that our evidence and documentation is in line with the engagement management we set out. And our work procedures should get consistent to the laws and regulations that define what we do. So one request is, don't consider the standards in isolation. The sections are divided into conceptual matters, pre-assignment matters of engagement, and then execution-related matters in specialized areas. But the 100, 200, 300 series are very, very closely knit with each other. And one request, if you have any questions, please pass them on to the moderator. I'll be happy to take them as and when they come along. So in the 300 series, we have 6 standards. 1 is about planning, 2 is about evidence, 3 is the work procedures, 4 is conducting of interviews. The 5th one is review and supervision. And the last one is testifying before a competent authority. What I will try to do when I take the individual standards, I will cover the common questions we face when we do these things. And what we will try is cover those, but there are still questions, as I said, please feel free. So 310, we said we integrate with 110 and 210. So we just heard from Udayji that we need to know what we're doing. Litigation support, forensic accounting. What is it exactly that the mandate wants us to do? And the one thing I'd like to cover in the mandate is sometimes you could have always a little bit of overlap. Like any investigation, for example, would have an element of forensics, but not all forensics may necessarily have an investigation. So once we've decided in 210 what our assignment is, this is when we do our core planning. And there's a distinction in this standard between an engagement and an assignment. One simple way to look at it is the assignment are individual start to finish scope areas. And the engagement may comprise of several such assignments. So if we're dealing with a large conglomerate, multi-location, multi-country, each aspect of it would be an assignment, but the whole thing put together would be an engagement. And the person with whom we do our engagement acceptance and the contractual agreement would be someone from the central or the corporate team who would be necessarily our primary stakeholder. Now, when we go about planning, we do 5 basic things. Do we understand this business well enough? And when we do a fraud investigation, the key is understanding the business. And I do understand that every time we go to a new industry sometimes. You could go to a glass industry, you could go to a textile industry, you could go to a gem industry, you could go to a mining industry, you could be doing insurance, you could be doing banking, you could be doing stock. But the beginning of any plan is to make sure you have enough people on the team that understand the business context. The understanding of business context is crucial in a fraud investigation. Because unless we don't understand the business context, we don't get to see in what context the decisions management took were taken. We don't get the context of that decision unless we understand the business. And as a corollary, we don't understand the risks. There are general risks, there are specific risks. In commodities, you have a different set of risks. With a lot of foreign exchange related transactions, you have a different risk. Depending on the kind of market, whether it's seasonal or how it is, you have a different set of business risks. So these are items we need to do. Once we have a basic knowledge, understanding, and a risk assessment, we need to discuss with the stakeholders and confirm that our understanding is in line with their expectation. Now that you have the broad framework and the business and technology portions covered, we need to understand what are the technical related tools we need. In the earlier section, I did hear sometimes the promoters may not be cooperative, particular so in bank loans, more so in terms of insolvency related transaction audits. We could be dealing with computers left over in different offices. So you may require imaging and other kinds of tools. Depending on the kind of transaction software and integrations they have, you would need other tools and technology to be able to analyze the data. So in terms of technology, do we have what we need to do this? How many locations are we covering? What's the communication between the teams? How do we share information? How do we keep it confidential? Do we need some kind of technology to do that? And then finally, in terms of number of locations, in terms of expertise, in terms of skill, in terms of manpower, in terms of back office, in terms of on-site, how many people do we need to execute this in the expected time frame? What's going to be the work methodology? Now, we covered a little bit of communication in Standard 250. Now, how much of our plan should we communicate is a question I'm often asked. The client is the primary stakeholder. We are obligated to him under the contract. And they're entitled to know what we need to do. So let's say some portions of communication are mandatory. If I plan to visit a particular site, the management of that site needs to know that we're coming so that we'd be allowed inside. We'd be given the kind of access to documents, to if it's a factory, to the manufacturing area, to the godown area, to the warehouse. We need someone to explain us the factory process. So you need to communicate that you're going there. But what you need not communicate is why you're going there. Some of the cards you can keep, but some necessarily you have to communicate. And there is an expectation that stakeholders get updated. So you can go through your engagement acceptance points and communicate back to the stakeholder with reference to those points. But it is an area where discretion is needed, because you don't want to divulge your entire plan, because you don't know how much it would warn the people whom you're investigating. So it's a delicate balance. Evidence and documentation. First is evidence is a very, very broad word. So I'll try to simplify it. What matters in evidence? There are some words which are, it should be reliable, it should be relevant, it should be sufficient, it should be appropriate, all good. But what is evidence? With any investigation, it starts with a predication. If it's a bank, possibly a loan has become an NPA. And the bank wants to know why the borrower couldn't pay. Is it business reasons? Is there siphoning? Is there diversion? Is there fraud? That's what the bank wants to know. In a different context, a company may appoint an investigator because it thinks the cost of procurement is very high. And it doesn't think that the vendors are giving the best price, and it's possible their employees are involved. So everything starts with a predication. So the questions we need to ask about evidence are, does it tell us what happened? Does it tell us anything about when did it happen? Does it tell us anything about why it happened? Does it tell us anything about the how, the methodology of the fraud? And does it tell us the where? Is it one location, many locations? Is it on the net? So the simple 5 questions it has to answer through evidence. And one tip I would give you is try to keep these scenarios in mind when you define the hypothesis. It should cover all the 5 questions. Then your evidence, either affirming or denying your hypothesis, would flow accordingly. The other important thing about relevance, I will start with relevance first and come to relevant and reliable second. Relevance is most important. Many a time, the appointing authorities confuse past misdemeanors with evidence. That a person did similar things in the past is a red flag. It's not evidence. And people get more excited when the person was convicted and punished with whatever was the punishment. A suspension, a denial of promotion, maybe even sometime in imprisonment. But that is not relevant because it's on a different date, on a different crime, and doesn't pertain to the current matter investigated. Yes, it's important. It's a red flag. That's what caused the predication. But that is not evidence. Next part is reliability. Can be verified. We'll come a lot more to reliability in digital and other domains when we come to that respective standard. But can it be verified? Is it tangible? Does it have a proper chain of custody? Can we, for example, if we got data, can we prove that this is the data which was taken from the company's regular transaction data by imaging? Which date was the image taken? This data has not been tampered from the time it is taken. If anybody wants to check today, the data is the same as it was on the original. So, reliability. And we should have documentation about how we gathered our evidence. Did we respect privacy? Did we respect people's rights and obligations, which is one of the basic principles while gathering evidence? Did we follow all protocols and procedures? Did we just pick up a pen drive because it was available? Did we just not go in and take a backup or parts of the data without the consent of the data owner? The ownership and custody of the documentation, maintaining the chain of custody, all remains our, shall we say, ownership as the professional doing the investigation. Give you one more example. This we come across quite frequently. In investigations, multiple times, we do come across incidents of payout, where, let's take the example of a company which called us to investigate procurement frauds. There were payouts from the vendor to the, let's say, senior officials in the procurement department. The company was able to influence the bank into giving us the bank statement copies of the perpetrators, because the company had a very good relationship. It banked with the same bank. The perpetrators had an account there, and they gave us the statements informally. Now, that is evidence not obtained in the proper fashion, because it can't be relied. The bank would later, when it comes to legal or judicial scrutiny, deny they ever gave it to us. So that can't be a basis to form a conclusion in a report. But given the indication, the management can definitely seek those bank statements formally through the police or any enforcement agency to make the case and the evidence tenable in a court of law. And the other thing about evidence and documentation, if these things get into court, it's usually a long and arduous process. So the documentation in the firms has to be very good. You could be asked questions about this 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, even later after you submit the report. So the individuals may not be there, but the process and procedure must be such that you're able to prove the relevance and reliability of the evidence with appropriate and sufficient documentation. Now, work procedures. Work procedures are usually, I would take them by way of planning into 3 parts. One is to see whether we are covered under any specific law or regulation. Could be insurance, could be SEBI, could be RBI's master circular on frauds, could be anything related to mining, related to the industry in which your client operates. So that's the first thing. Second is procedures for our team. Third is, are we engaging experts? Now, irrespective of which area, one is where we decide what we want to do. which is phase one, which is behind the scenes in our office. We decide what we want to see based on our initial hypothesis. We decide whom we need to meet, the locations we need to go, the kind of documents or evidence we need to seek, the tools we're going to use, who's going to be deployed where, as per the plan, what's going to be the accountability. If it's a large team of 10 or more people, who reports to whom? Who keeps track of the activities everywhere? So that's phase one. Phase two. Now you went to the sites, you got documentation, you accessed the system, you looked at records, and you made some assessment. Now, what is the procedure to engage? How much of your findings do you share? What are the clarifications we still need? Depending on the kind of the client, there could be manufacturing processes, there could be credit processes, where the debtors and inventory in your drawing power statement need verification. There could be manufacturing related impacts on working capital. There could be issues with funding not done, which you need answers and explanations for. So each one of them would also need to address your hypotheses. It would need to address your fraud indicators. You should look at what is the evidence you have on hand or what evidence you need. Look at how your experts are doing. Do they have the expertise? And then now we decide these are the procedures we do to engage with our stakeholders. Here again, now we've done the planning. We've set out the benchmarks for evidence and documentation. We have a work procedure in place according to which we're working. So it's a good time again to communicate how far we've gone. Here again, how far we've gone, you met so many people. We have visited these many locations. You go back to standard 250. We got cooperation here. We're lacking cooperation here. Out of the work so far, are there essential matters which need to be communicated? Are there significant matters which need to be communicated? Those are what must be communicated. And at the same time, if it's too early to make a particular thing public, you can always use your discretion to report it at a time as an investigator you think is appropriate. So now, in the last part, we said phase two is engaging. Let's just go back there for a minute. When you need to engage with the stakeholders, we do what we call interviews. Now, interviews as forensic investigating professionals, as chartered accountants, are only interviews. I do not like to do interrogations unless we have appropriate support either from law enforcement or if there are internal inquiries from management. And I essentially view interviews of two types. The most common part is information seeking interviews. Information seeking interviews means I want to understand the purchase process. How are vendors enlisted? How do you do a tender? How do you allot work? How are they paid? What's the process for making an MRR? How do you deal with services? How's the warehouse procedure where materials are received, or the user department procedure where services are received integrated with the payment from finance or treasury? What's the process for credit approval here? Who does the credit? Who reviews the outstanding? Who knows when it's time and the service is complete and it's ready to bill? Who provides the right documentation so that our bills are prepared on time? So these are what I call information seeking interviews. We're understanding how the organization works when things are right. If it's a larger organization, they will have manuals, they will have work procedures, they may even be following some ISO related norms, which will help you in information gathering. So these are generally very genial conversational interviews. The other kind of interview, what I call, is a confirmatory interview. I've received conflicting things from multiple people. I need to go there to understand which is right and which is wrong. This again is not confrontational. If someone told me something which doesn't tie up with what I've seen, let me give you an example. Somebody wasn't there at work. I've either seen logs that he entered the system, or I've seen logs that they were at work, or I've seen evidence that their car was in the car park through the car parking system. So there seems to be a mismatch. Sir, you told me this, you told me that, but this is what the documentation says. That's what we call confirmatory interviews. So how do we do these interviews? First is, an interview is not a conversation. It's very structured and very methodical. You should have a plan. You should have a set of questions ready. We should have done our homework. If we are learning the manufacturing process, I would definitely recommend that we take a tour of the plant, understand what machinery is there, what are the basic machining or manufacturing processes that happen, what's the general layout of the work process, where does the raw material come in, where does it come out, what products does the company manufacture, what is its inputs. So then we have doubts, we're going to an expert in the company to answer those doubts. So that is the methodology I usually follow. It's possible that as a result of the answers, your interview may go in a slightly different direction, but the objective of the interview doesn't change. The other thing I have observed, which is the hardest thing to do in an interview as an investigator, is to appear honest, be honest. Both are equally important. And give the impression and maintain that in real life, that confidentiality will be maintained. The confidentiality is very, very important, in the sense that, let's make an assumption that we're investigating a company where a fraud has occurred. That is the hypothesis. It's extremely unlikely that every person in that company is aware of or condones the fraud. There are going to be a significant number of good people in any company. They're going to be very scared to come and open up before an external investigator. They would never come and open up before an external investigator if they're not confident that the professional will maintain confidentiality. A very, very important part of interviews, in the sense that you have to give the employees of that organization at large the feeling that you're open, you're accessible, and what is in the interview room will not be used outside. Now, when we do these sessions with not virtually but physically, the question that comes is, how can we keep such commitments? The answer is, use the interview as a red flag. Verify what the person has told. See what is the background. See if the facts and the other evidences you've got in 320 match with what the person has told you. Don't reveal the information of your source until absolutely necessary, and as far as possible after taking them into confidence. And I have found this an extremely useful tool while doing interviews. The word does get around that this person handles confidential information. And they're very, very silly things which you come across during an interview. Somebody came on a weekend, for example, because they wanted to print his kids' college work or project work. Yeah, maybe it's not ethical, it's not the right thing to do. He said sorry. It has nothing to do with the case we're investigating. And if I agree to let it go, if that is the case, I actually have someone who will help. So that's a simple way of building trust and keeping confidentiality. The second important thing is keep the interview within the scope. Be aware that if you're interviewing somebody who is connected to the fraud, they're usually going to try to divert you. They are going to give you roundabout answers. They're going to try and confuse, which is why if you've done the planning well, we can politely keep bringing them back on track. Now, admissibility of interviews. The interviews which relate to structured individuals for eliciting information about processes, I generally do not find any objection for people signing them, especially if you take into account what they say, the exceptions. They would tell you that in general, this is the procedure, but in emergency, for example, I don't follow tender. Within 48 hours, we get an approval of a particular committee. Subject to that, we do tender. Yes. We follow approval and delegation limits, but in an emergency, so-and-so in the factory is authorized to take approval, provided he informs and gets a ratification from whoever is the authority, could be the board. So take down whatever they say are exceptions, and usually they will not, if their point of view is fully taken into account, you would get signatures. The confirmatory ones or corroboratory ones are a little more tricky. If we don't confront and are able to get reasonable explanations, I think they can be worded appropriately and you get the information. In some cases, it may have slipped somebody's mind. He would say, sorry. Then I guess the best thing to do is discard the earlier interview and record a fresh one on the actual state. Because if the earlier interview wasn't factual, it's not going to be evidence anyway. So keep the second one. As far as possible, try to take signatures. Recording of interviews, recording of confessions, in courts of law is usually not admissible. One criteria is that you need consent to record. And the second is even confessions before law enforcement agencies are generally contested in courts of law because they are expected to repeat that in front of the magistrate or whatever is the competent authority. So don't get too worried about confessions and confrontational interviews. While they are useful, they have their limits. Go to 350, review and supervision. Now, I think there was a question earlier about does this apply to everybody? And I think it was very well answered that it applies to chartered accountants that lead this kind of assignment. But typically, if I need 10 people, not all 10 people are going to be chartered accountants. They're going to be qualified, they're going to be information technology professionals, they're going to be data analysis professionals, there could be people who are studying chartered accountancy or whatever. Management consultants to help us with strategy, experts from a completely different field. So if you have those things, the onus of maintaining and confirming that the standards are followed remains with the chartered accountant. So it's mandatory that we keep a kind of review to make sure that things are processing the way we wanted. The way we wanted is we had an objective. Is the objective still the same? Is the plan still relevant? Are we checking our hypotheses? Is the hypothesis still relevant? The most important part, to my view, of the review and supervision is to see and check the relevance of the hypothesis and the plan. The plan and hypotheses are made at a particular point in time. Time is not static. With time, things change. Is the team bringing enough information back to the oversight team on what has changed? We've discovered in some assignments that the data was tampered. If the data was tampered, we need to revisit that entirely. We need to go back and do a kind of imaging to see what's the reliability. When was it tampered? Try and see whether we can do an examination of that hard disk and figure out what happened. So that is one example. The other example is that based on our discussions with the primary stakeholders, we thought there was a fraud. But as you get into the business deeper, it's happened in quite a few assignments recently. We understand that the impact of the COVID pandemic was actually very, very significant on the cash flow. In the sense that sometimes we have this concept that vendors can be bullied, but sometimes the vendors themselves are huge organizations. And your customers may actually be smaller organizations, in which case the company is in a very strange position. It can't bargain with the vendors. It has to pay them on time, and it can't collect receivables quickly in situations like COVID. That or you had placed orders for machinery. Machinery wasn't delivered. There were shipments waiting for dispatch in the factory, which couldn't go. 3 months, 4 months. So we've seen all these things when we did investigation. So these start challenging our hypotheses. So that means go back to the plan, evaluate, revisit the plan, change it. Second, that's about the plan and the hypothesis. About whatever you've seen. Has the team followed rules of chain of custody? Is the evidence relevant? Is it reliable? Is the documentation appropriate? Is it sufficient? At each stage of review and supervision, is there any significant matter? Is there any essential matter to be reported under Section 250, under Standard 250? Are the working papers in order? These are things which are an essential part of each engagement. But another question which comes when we do this is, ours is a small firm. Is it possible for us to do all this? We work with teams of 4 or 5 people. I guess the standard still maintains the documentation should be sufficient and appropriate. And at the end of the day, you're going to say that you're going to come to a conclusion on the predication on which you were hired. So there has to be evidence. You must have work papers. And in a court of law, I don't think there is any excuse for being a smaller firm or a larger firm. If we've made a conclusion, we should have evidence to back the belief and the conclusion. And we should be able to demonstrate either way. If you felt that why, for example, it became an NPA, if you felt that there was business reasons for it, you should have enough documentation to support that evidence. If you think there was prima facie scope to believe that there is fraud or fraudulent transactions exist, you should be able to have evidence to show what transactions led you to believe that. So I don't think it matters whether you're large or small. The sections on work procedures, evidence, review and supervision would apply everywhere. Are interviews taken only to form basis for hypotheses? No, sir. I don't think so. Like we said, interviews are for 2 basic purposes. One is to find out what's happening in the company, find out procedures unique to that industry, find out processes unique to the industry, follow the transaction trail, or you've done all the processes, you've done all the procedures. Now, statements made by people don't match with what you've learned. There are instances, like you said, like maybe everything above 5 lakhs was to be approved by a particular person or a committee. You've seen instances where they have not been approved. You've seen cases where documentation is insufficient at receipt. You've seen credit given to a particular customer even though his outstandings continue. You've seen violation of procedures. So now, based on this documentary evidence, you need to go to the individual and ask again, Why was the credit given? What happened to the credit review? Why isn't there documentation or inspection or other material related to this receipt? So this gives us the basis to look at the data. And this second type of interview lets us attend the match what we are seeing in the data with what are the statements we're getting in the interviews. Hope that clarifies the question. The last part of this is the 300 series is about testifying before a competent authority. Now, before we get into the details, let's first figure out why do I need to go before a competent authority? We need to go before a competent authority for multiple reasons. First is, let's say I've completed my investigation. I thought there was prima facie reason that there is a fraud. My primary stakeholder decided that my report was good enough to be handed over to an investigative agency, could be an FIR, could be CBI, could be anyone. Based on my report, they do an investigation. So when it does come to the court or the competent authority, if my report is called in, I would be asked, or I may be asked, I went to say that there was no fraud in a particular thing, another instance. The bank wasn't happy, or my primary stakeholder wasn't happy. They did a fresh investigation, they called somebody else. So my report is called into question, so I may have to testify. I talked about prima facie evidence about a fraud. The borrower isn't happy, they file a case. So multiple reasons why we can end up arguing before courts. So whatever the reason, we are called because we did an investigation. This is where everything we did from 210 to 350 comes to our help. You should be independent. There can be no conflict of interest. If there is a conflict of interest, we can't recuse ourselves from going before the competent authority. Because if you're summoned, you're summoned. So if there's a conflict of interest, it should be disclosed before the competent authority. And you can go into testifying on both sides. You can be called by your primary stakeholder or an investigating agency whom you helped, or we could be statutory auditors, internal auditors, consultant to the client, no way connected with forensics, but testifying on the processes which happened at the client. So what the standard tells us is, doesn't matter whether we're on the client side, on the authority investigating side. When we go to give testimony, our duty is towards the competent authority. And our evidence has to be limited to what we did in the course of the assignment. And ideally, the person sent to represent the firm which did the investigation should have been actively involved in the execution to understand. And there's a greater onus on us as chartered accountants. We need, in many ways, to adhere to the various applicable laws, make sure that we adhere not just to these standards, where matters related to accounting, disclosure, and other things are involved, and we are raising questions about adherence to those standards, then we should be thorough with those as well. But and ideally, a lot of this is there in the implementation guide. It sounds a little scary, but it isn't. Ideally, I would suggest that if we come to these situations, you should do a dry run, understand what are the kind of questions which could be asked, prepare your replies. There will be cross-examination. There will be counter questions. There will be an examination of the report and the evidences. But once again, the standards actually give a very clear guideline. If our evidence is reliable and it's relevant and supported by appropriate and sufficient documentation, I think the testimony should be comfortable. But always good to do a dry run and have another individual ask you the questions so that you're comfortable on that day. We now come to the 400 series of standards. These are basically special standards. Any questions on the 300 so far? I think there is one. Is there guidance on the client not agreeing with the findings? I'll try to come to this when we do reporting. Sonal madam, you can remind me when we come to 510.
Sure, sir.
It's a little more convenient. I will remember, but in case I forget, it's more convenient when we do it with reporting. All right, data analysis. There are these are specific evidence-related items for data, which is the core of what we do. So our work plan should include a data analysis plan. We should understand our scope, boundaries of the data. We should be looking at maintaining confidentiality. We should look at how we ensure data integrity. By data boundary, we mean, are there extraordinary values or outliers which are suspicious? Do we have explanations for them? What did we do in terms of data acquisition? Do we have permission to acquire that data like we discussed earlier? What did we do for data preparation? Did we keep an image? Are we confident that our data is a replica of the original? And yes, one tip for people who are in this business new, we always work with copies and images. I would go as far as to say never work with original data, because once your IDs, guest, temporary, whatever is given to you, are implanted there, we don't have control on that database anymore. The ID is generated by the company, so they can reset the password at any time. They can bring in any kinds of entries in your name. So never take a write access, always do view. Any kind of analysis or view of the data, whether you use ACL, whether you use IDEA or any tool you're comfortable with, If you use a BI tool, please make sure you perform it on a data copy. And it's another interesting word here. It's called the test of reproducibility. The test of reproducibility means if a test is conducted by two different professionals, the same test on the same set of data, the result should come out the same. So what the standard is trying to do here is it's trying to say that professionals' work should meet a particular standard. For example, let's take something as simple as a VLOOKUP. On the same set of data, two sets of data, if two professionals do a VLOOKUP, you should come up with the same resultant table. You should come up with the same top 10 values, the same bottom 5 values. You should come up with the same aging, for example, by running through a debtors or a vendors table. If you're using techniques like Benford or Lund's algorithm, you should get the same result on the same set of data. And if there's a lot of data analysis, tools, and imaging involved, when you go back to 360 as a testifying professional, person who goes there should be more conversant with the technology. Data confidentiality, extremely key. I think Udayji covered it a little bit in section 250. Please be very careful whom you share findings with, how much of the findings you share. Any findings beyond the primary stakeholder would apply definitely, but you need the permission of the primary stakeholder. Okay, we have a question. As an investigator, to limit our risks, can we carry out procedures only as agreed in the engagement? Like I said, as part of your review and supervision process, if circumstances have changed, you may have to revise your approach. But if that revision in approach, I don't know where this question is coming from, but if the revision in approach requires additional effort, additional time, and additional money, definitely it is what I consider a significant matter, and you need to discuss it and communicate with the stakeholders and make appropriate revisions in the plan. So if you've discovered that a particular area is not reliable and it needs more intensive testing based on what you found, you have to change your plan accordingly. All right, let's come to the next one. Evidence gathering in the digital domain. Two words are very important. We always refer to this as e-discovery, which means evidence is already there. It's there for us to discover, and it's based on the process we followed, their legal requirements, technical standards, and the digital domain is very, very vast. So far in my examples, I've limited myself into transactional records for finance, but today, none of these work in isolation. They work with payment gateways, Where there are factories, there's e-logistics, there's barcoding, there's GPS tracking, there are weighbridges, there's digital inspection. There's so many things which are on the side that happen, which interface with the ERP system or interface with the accounting system. And outside of those interfacing with the accounting system, you have the email universe where there's so much data to be found in terms of correspondence, in terms of confirmations. Then you have documentation, which is stored digitally. Then you have the social media. You have the corporate social media. You have the personal social media. So the digital domain we have to see is extremely vast. And usually where this digital domain starts expanding is in cases where the key management personnel are no longer with the company. So you need to look at all sources of information. And you also need to be aware of matters happening about the company in the public domain, in addition to the digital domain. Lots of evidence in the digital domain may require specific skills. Just like you have a lot of quantitative skills in tools like IDEA or ACL or even Excel or MS Access or whatever you're comfortable with, there are tools similarly which are very similar to search text engines like Google, which will go through email, which will go through social media and bring you common terms, is there any false positive level or acceptable error percentage defined? That is a very good question, but it depends on the kind of data you're analyzing, sir or madam. On different data, based on your experience of that kind of sample, it depends on what's your sample, how big is the population, what is the expected variation in that population, which is why I suggested you go to data boundaries, look at outliers, analyze the outliers, see if you can figure out why they are there. That, when you do that together, you would be in a position to understand the false positive and review the other results accordingly. But very good question. So you do need to look at your data, your boundary, your outliers, both at the inward extreme and the outward extreme, and then make a decision. And 100% accuracy, yes, it's rare. There's a special standard on loans and borrowings because it's the key where many of our works happen. The standard is not written particularly from the standard of banks. It's viewed from loans, borrowings, misutilization of funds, and ideally, what we track is diversion, siphoning, asset tracing, trail of funds based on the sanction, and we're mostly concerned with after sanction, but several assignments deal with pre-sanction in terms of were false documents submitted for the loan, were things which needed to be examined, not examined, was the monitoring in line. So the assignment can be from any of these areas. So what are the possible, they give you an indicative list. whether loans were extended, like I said, through unethical or inappropriate means, assets given as security, collateral, are non-existent, overvalued, funds not utilized, which is diversion or siphoning, misutilized or put to shell companies, subsidiary companies, false documents in terms of debtors, stock, purchases, and issues related to timely interest. But if you ask me, the loans or borrowings related is fairly straightforward in terms of evidence, in terms of procedure. You have RBI's guidelines. Banks have fairly well laid out process of a sanction letter and stuff like that. So I'd say this is kind of some of the simpler assignments. I come to the last couple for the day. And I guess the most important, which is reporting results. It's quite possible that the engagement will have multiple assignments and they'd want multiple reports. So no harm in giving them multiple reports. Now, the report is finally what we're judged with in a court of law with the competent authority or with the bank, with an adjudicating authority or whatever name you want to call it. So the first thing is, let's not be vague and let's not be very verbose. There's no formal content prescribed, but the standards do give you a format with key elements, which means an introduction, an executive summary, and stuff like that. But it's not fixed in stone. You will also be governed by the statute you're reporting under. And yes, there was a question here. What happens if the client doesn't agree with the findings? Yeah, good question. Question was, what happens when the client doesn't agree with the findings? Now, I don't know exactly what the questioner meant by client, but let's take the one we're usually familiar with the bank, a borrower, and an investigator. The general accepted judicial stand is that the borrower should have access to your observations and be provided with a reasonable chance to respond to the observations of the investigator. If based on a forensic report, the bank declares willful default, the borrower can claim that the principles of natural justice have not been followed. So it's a matter of good practice. It is the principle of natural justice that your observations be shared with the borrower and they be given a chance to respond with their point of view. And in your conclusion, you can, with given justification, agree or disagree with the borrower. Second part is, I'm assuming, I'm not sure what the questioner meant, so I am giving you another part. It's possible that I may not agree with my primary stakeholder. That is the person who appointed. In the course of investigation, we have come across lapses on the part of the primary stakeholder. Monitoring related, sanction related. Should that form part of the report? Definitely yes. Second part. During the course of investigation, you think there is significant evidence to suggest that people from the primary stakeholder are involved. I think in those cases, Section 8 will apply. Provide the reasons, provide the evidence, and say, given the circumstances, we can't continue. The other important part of discussion, which is 5, which we discussed, the primary onus of sharing the findings with the borrower in a bank example is the bank. The primary onus, in case I'm investigating an internal fraud at the behest of the management, is the management. And the primary onus of sharing the findings is the management or the bank in either case. But it's my job as an investigator to tell them that if you don't share the findings and take action, the action can be overturned by any competent authority. Then we come to the most important part of the assignment. Report shall not express an opinion and not pass judgment on guilt or innocence. We're commenting on transactions, we're not commenting on people. Commenting on people is part of the portfolio of the competent authority. We are investigators. So how do you get out of this? You can prove that purchases were made at 3 times the market price. These prices were approved by X, who is the purchase manager. We could not find any reason for such high prices. These caused a loss of so much to the company. We have statements from the vendors that they were forced to build high prices and they shared them with Mr. X. Statement from the vendor is enclosed. In view of the above, they look prima facie fraudulent, and the matter may be investigated further. So there's no accusation. You've given their side. If you are allowed to share the findings with Mr. X, give his side as well. And after that, you're still not satisfied, given your conclusion that we need these to be further investigated. But put the facts on the table, all the facts. That is our job. And your conclusion that these things are fraudulent. And the other thing, some of the things which Mr. Kulkarni discussed are covered in 8. If you're having life-threatening situation, stakeholders are not cooperating to any degree, you don't have access to data, data has been manipulated, it's not reliable, all of those together are Section 8. But most important is, even if you're withdrawing from the assignment, you should give a report. We have another excellent question. What is your personal liability in case of data leakage by use of third-party conversion tools? There is no specific coverage, to my knowledge, in the FIS, but anyone doing this kind of assignment should be covered with some kind of indemnity assurance, because by the very definition of the word forensic, we know it's going to end up in litigation. And I will answer that question actually in 3 parts. It's an excellent question. The first part is, when you use third-party tools, make sure they are licensed versions. The licensed versions give you a back-to-back agreement with them on the agreements you sign. So when you look at the fine print, you will be aware when you sign what they are responsible for and what they are not responsible for. If you are storing on the cloud, it depends on what cloud. I've dealt with AWS and I've dealt with Microsoft. Both have fairly stringent norms on data privacy. And I've not faced any issue of data leakage on cloud storage from both these parties. Now, the other corollary to this is that the tools which give you better coverage are usually the tools that are a little more expensive. The cloud service providers who give you better contracts and better terms in terms of data protection are again a little more expensive than the others. So control comes at a cost. But yes, prima facie, if the leak happened at our end, if the leak happened with our tool, if the leak happened because of our employee, I don't think we can pass it on. And then again, the question is, what was the leak? What was the kind of data? What was the leak to? Was it to media? Did it impact the case? Did it weaken our case? So those are severe questions. And one of the precautions I would suggest personally, the data is what you keep. There are different layers of security you apply to data. So if it's general ERP data accessible to everybody, email data which was accessible to everybody in the client, that's one level. There's your analysis of it, that's one level. There are the conclusions you made on it, that's one level. Your internal team brainstorming and other stuff, that's a further higher level of conclusion. The review and discussions of the defense and what we put finally in the report, that's finally the third level, the final fifth level. So each would have ideally a different level of security. Okay. Then the next question we have is, who is the eligible authority to levy punishment, penalty? It is different in different cases, sir. You go to CBI, it's the CBI court. If it's an internal investigation, the management is the final decision. If the disciplinary authority of the management is not good enough or their decision is contested, it can be you can go to a court. If it's a magistrate's court, again, it can be contested in a high court. If SFIO files the charges, in whichever court they file the charges is the competent authority. So depending on the nature of the case, depending on whom you submit it to, depending on the action taken, the eligible authority changes. And I'm not certain the question, I was answering the question from who will punish the borrower. I trust the question is about who will punish the borrower. If it's the bank, they have their own disciplinary proceedings within the bank for any non-compliance of bank procedures and other things. If it's any regular fraud investigation, it goes through a EOW, a CBI, or whatever is the agency process that Mr. Kulkarni discussed when we did 240. So the key elements of the report are given in the standards. And the other important thing, which is partially answering the question asked, your assumptions, limitations of tools, any disclaimers can come. Depending on the kind of disclaimer and how well it's phrased by your legal team, it would help you. And the other key is how you reference the work of the expert, where applicable, in your report. And the final standard relates to quality control. It basically means, did we do a good job? Did we have learnings? Do we need to improve in future? What do we take? A large part of this comes out of the review and supervision. My personal view is quality should be inbuilt in the review and supervision team so that you can improve as you go along and update your quality control and everything accordingly. One of the things planned in the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India is a CPE, which means that those of us who want to practice in this, we must have at least 5 of the CPE in matters related to forensic accounting and investigation. So I think I have slightly exceeded my time, but I'm still happy to take any questions, if there are any more. Another very interesting question on artificial intelligence and automation for conducting on the digital domain. I'll answer that in 2 parts because both are different. Automation, you control the set of procedures in an intelligent manner. You write routines which extract, analyze, or do something with the data and give you a result, and you retain the responsibility. So yes, you can use that to do data analysis and review of data in the digital domain. Artificial intelligence is where someone has written a logic for something to perform transactions or reviews in a particular fashion. The responsibility of whether it is artificial intelligence or automation remains with you. It is you finally who are going to sign the report. There is no restriction on tools or recommendation of tools in the accounting and investigation standards. But to make sure you pick the right tools, I'll give you examples where I have used AI for case studies, similar kinds of things, search for the most appropriate tool, evaluate tools. Then finally, I look at the tools and I make the decision on which I will use, in which particular kind of digital domain. But the decision remains with us. Automation is a lot more easier because it's usually defined by us, so we can explain it. But artificial intelligence to explain, to declare fraud or otherwise, is still very dicey. And I think, sir or madam, the best answer to that is driverless cars have been around for a long time, but they're still not clearly visible other than in WhatsApp videos. One of the reasons is we don't know the responsibilities. Who takes the responsibilities for artificial intelligence? Yes. But excellent question, sir.
Thanks a lot, Salesh sir, for detailing these standards to us and taking up our queries.
Most welcome.
Thank you everyone for joining in. We would end the session now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.